Hey guys, tonight we're not just rolling back the clock, we're locking the doors, throwing away the key, and taking a soothing, slightly bonkers tour through the darkest corridors of Victorian medicine. Welcome to the brutal way Victorians treated mental illness. That's right. Grab your laudanum, hide your delicate nerves, and try not to faint, because you're about to meet the world's most anxious doctors, the least relaxing cures, and more straitjackets than a family reunion for magicians. Before you settle in, please like and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy this kind of nonsense. Drop a comment with where you're listening from, dim the lights, turn on a fan for that subtle asylum ambience, and get comfortable, maybe tuck in your toes so Nurse Ratched can't get to them. But let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered, what exactly got you committed in Victorian times? Could feeling blue mean a prescription for leeches? What's the difference between a diagnosis and a really judgmental horoscope? Why did hysteria sound like a women's networking group, but somehow always ended in cold water therapy? Could you survive a week with the diet, roommates, and laundry schedule of a 19th century asylum? Would you trust a doctor whose most reliable tool was a bucket of ice and a mustache you could use as a bookmark? Congratulations! You've just woken up in 1852 London. The smog is thick, the streets are loud, and you've just been diagnosed with excessive thinking. Welcome to the asylum, friend. Good luck. London in 1852 is a kaleidoscope of fog, horse manure, and ambition. Mental illness is suddenly the talk of the town, usually whispered about while elbowing through crowds of equally nervous people. You're just hoping the River Thames doesn't catch fire again. Let's set the scene. You wake up in a cramped, musty room where your only source of fresh air is a window facing a wall that has never, ever been described as picturesque. You step outside and immediately inhale a combination of coal smoke, dubious stew, and eau de Thames. A fragrance scientists would later classify as a danger to public health. The air is so thick you could chew it, but you'd break a tooth on the grit. Your boots squelch into something on the street, don't look down, and you realize that, in this city, the fog isn't just weather. It's a living thing. It's following you. It's possibly sizing you up for dinner. London at mid-century is bursting at the seams. More than 2 million people all jammed together. Powered by ambition, gin, and the constant background noise of existential anxiety. There's a sense that everyone is on the brink of something, madness, genius, or possibly food poisoning from last night's eel pie. In every crowded alley, someone's shouting about the end times, someone else is offering dubious remedies for nervous complaints, and someone's just been run over by a horse. The Victorians invent the modern city, and the modern city invents the nervous breakdown. Welcome to progress. In polite company, mental illness is a subject wrapped in euphemism and draped in velvet. People don't say you're depressed. They say you're suffering from melancholia, a condition best treated with brisk walks, spiritual reflection, or by being gently ignored. Anxiety? That's nervous exhaustion. Mania? A touch of excitement. If you're poor, madness means the workhouse or the asylum. If you're rich, it means being prescribed a spa vacation, heavy curtains, and maybe a little laudanum in your afternoon tea. The city itself is enough to drive anyone around the bend. Every day, you jostle through crowds with faces set to permanent grimace. There are street performers juggling flaming torches, mudlarks digging for treasures, or just not dead rats, by the river, and vendors hawking patent tonics that probably contain more gin than medicine. People read penny, dreadfuls about murders, disappearances, and mysterious goings-on in foggy alleys, then wonder why nobody sleeps well. Everyone is worried about something. Will the factories keep running? Will the Queen approve of the new sewer? Will your neighbour ever stop practicing the violin at midnight? For the Victorians, this is all part of the nervous age, an era when your nerves are expected to be frayed, as long as you do it with a stiff upper lip and well-shined shoes. Doctors write anxious columns in the Times about overstimulation. Too much reading, too much thinking, too much walking down the Strand, too much anything, really. Best to sit quietly and drink your bitters. At night, the city doesn't get quieter, it just gets weirder. Gaslights flicker through the haze, making every brick tenement look like it might contain either a mad scientist or your cousin George. The pubs fill with men and women looking for a break from the relentless throb of city life. Someone is always crying, softly into their gin, and someone else is loudly explaining that the government controls the weather. You don't argue with him. He's probably right. And then, over it all, is the dread that if you feel a little too sad, a little too tired, or a little too annoyed at the noise, you might find yourself on the receiving end of treatment. In 1852 London, the line between eccentric and insane is so thin you could cut it with a sigh. So you keep your chin up, avoid the worst puddles, and hope the only diagnosis you'll get is a touch of London gloom, highly treatable with tea, a warm fire, and, ideally, several miles between you and the nearest asylum. Here, sadness isn't sadness. It's melancholia, and it could get you locked up. Did you sneeze, cry, or ask for extra toast at breakfast? Congratulations, you're a textbook case. Victorian diagnoses are less about science and more about your reputation for sighing too loudly. Let's say you're having a bad day. You wake up, stub your toe on the chamber pot, and mutter something unprintable about the weather. If your neighbor overhears you sounding glum, or God forbid, you skip church, you've already triggered the early warning system for madness. In Victorian society, every emotional wobble is suspicious. People aren't looking for reasons to help. They're compiling lists for the next meeting of the local society for the prevention of unusual behaviors. If you're a woman, your odds of diagnosis skyrocket. Maybe you feel tired, anxious, or, worst of all, have an opinion about your own life. The local doctor, who probably just spent the morning prescribing whiskey for gout, is quick to diagnose hysteria, a catch-all term that covers everything from menstrual cramps to reading too many novels. The prescription? A little bed rest, some isolation, and possibly a therapy session involving ice-cold baths, vigorous massages, or a stern lecture about knowing your place in the world. Men aren't safe either. Suffering from overwork? Welcome to the world of neurasthenia, the 19th century's favorite excuse for middle-aged exhaustion. You're working too hard, says your physician, while secretly jotting down notes about your twitchy eyelid and your habit of nervously folding your napkin. Your cure might involve a vacation to the seaside, if you're wealthy, or a brisk walk and a reminder to stop thinking so much if you're not. Children don't get a free pass either. Too quiet? Withdrawn tendencies. Too loud? Mania. Too curious? Moral insanity. There's a diagnosis for every personality type, and each one comes with a matching set of treatments that mostly involve removing anything fun from your life and doubling your servings of boiled turnip. Now, let's talk about the tools of the trade. The Victorian doctor's diagnostic kit. Forget MRIs and blood tests. You've got a stethoscope, a monocle, and a very large notebook for scribbling observations about how anxious you look while tying your shoes. The medical interview goes something like this. How are you feeling? Pause for dramatic effect. Are you certain? Longer pause. And do you ever feel peculiar? If you answer yes, that's a symptom. If you say no, that's denial, which is also a symptom. There are entire catalogues of nervous conditions in the Victorian age, from religious melancholy, too much church, to erotomania. Not nearly enough. Did you lose your appetite? Suspicious. Gained too much appetite? Even more suspicious. Someone is always lurking with a diagnosis. Even sleepwalking becomes a sign of moral decline. You can't even have a bad dream without someone calling for the family physician. And then there are the official textbooks, which make Gray's Anatomy look like a children's pop-up book. The language is dense, the logic circular, and the advice often involves either vigorous exercise or absolutely no movement at all. Are you feeling faint? Sit quietly in a dark room. Are you listless? Join a cricket club? Are you both? Well, maybe try praying harder and avoiding strong cheese. Of course, the church has its own opinions. Sadness might be a sin. Joy, if excessive, is probably dangerous. A well-timed confession is often the only thing standing between you and a full-time reservation at Street Dimphner's home for the perpetually slightly off. So, in the world of Victorian medicine, you learn quickly that the safest thing to do is keep your head down, smile politely, and never, ever sneeze in public. Because in this era, a symptom is never just a symptom, and the wrong one at the wrong time could turn your morning grumpiness into a diagnosis you'll never live down. All it takes is an inconvenient relative, a little family drama, or just the wrong mood at dinner. Blink twice and you're in an asylum, committed by someone who once lost a chess game to you in 1849. Your only crime, existing with feelings. All it takes is an inconvenient relative, a little family drama, or just the wrong mood at dinner. Blink twice and you're in an asylum, committed by someone who once lost a chess game to you in 1849. Your only crime, existing with feelings. Let's set the table literally. Imagine you're halfway through a slice of boiled mutton at the family dinner, and you make the grave error of sighing too loudly after your uncle's third retelling of the great train delay of '46. Aunt Beatrice, who's been waiting for years to seize the moral high ground, gives you a look that says, "We'll see about that." By dessert, you've been deemed peculiar and in need of rest. Within a week, a doctor with magnificent sideburns is summoned to take notes on how you butter your bread. Apparently, you're not doing it with enough vivacity. This is Victorian England, where the line between eccentric and unfit for society is about as solid as the gravy. And here's the beauty. You don't even have to do anything. Especially odd. Being a woman with strong opinions? Dangerous. A man prone to melancholy? Risky. A child who refuses to memorize Latin declensions? Practically an emergency. The asylums are ready and waiting, always happy to take in a fresh face with ambiguous symptoms. The legal process for committal is as reassuring as an open window on a foggy night. Officially, you need 2 doctors and a concerned relative to sign some paperwork. Unofficially, a single doctor with an overdeveloped sense of duty and a flair for calligraphy will do. The law is meant to prevent wrongful detainment. But let's be honest. Victorian society treats wrongful detainment as a suggestion, not a requirement. The paperwork is mostly a formality. You're never in the room for the discussion, but you're definitely the subject of it. By the time you realize what's happening, someone is packing you a travel bag and reminding you to look on the bright side. Let's talk about motives. Because in this era, commitment isn't always about concern. Sometimes it's about inheritance. Got an elderly aunt who stands between you and a lovely cottage in the Lake District? Suddenly, her fondness for talking to houseplants is concerning. Or maybe you're a wife who won't stop questioning your husband's financial decisions. That's hysteria, and it's off to the asylum for a restorative cold bath. If you're an inconvenient son-in-law, a sullen teenage daughter, or a business partner with too many questions, the asylum is the ultimate trump card. One doctor's signature, and you're out of the will and into the world of institutional gruel. Of course, there's also the self-committal route. Yes, some people choose the asylum life. Maybe you're overwhelmed by the noise of the city. or your nerves are so frayed you can't tell the difference between a church bell and the voice of God. Voluntary admission, they call it. Though once you're inside, voluntary becomes a philosophical debate. Getting in is easy. Getting out requires more paperwork, an impressive display of normalcy, and often a bribe for the head nurse. Even the staff have their biases. The moment you enter the front gates, you're greeted by a matron whose main qualification is the ability to detect moral weakness at 50 paces. She sizes you up, assigns you a number, and your personal history is boiled down to a one-line summary in a ledger. Prone to introspection, lack of cheerfulness, reads too many novels. The reasons for commitment are as varied as the wallpaper patterns in the common room. If you think you'll have a chance to explain yourself, think again. Protest too much, and you're agitated. Stay too quiet, and you're withdrawn. Try to act cheerful, and you're overcompensating. It's a diagnostic minefield, and the best you can do is hope that your stay is short. Your cellmate is not a chronic screamer, and that someday, somehow, someone on the outside remembers to water your houseplants. So next time you have a strong feeling, maybe save it for after dessert. In Victorian England, your sanity is only as secure as your last family argument, and you never know who's keeping score. Your new home is a gloomy fortress of echoing hallways and uncertain aromas. You get a bed, a bucket, and a view of a brick wall. The good news, no chores. The bad news, the schedule includes a cold bath at 6 a.m. Let's take it from the top. The doors shut behind you with a thud that says this is going to be a while. The walls are painted in that universal color of indifference, damp beige, with the occasional streak that could be water damage, could be old gruel, could be the ghost of a previous resident's hope. The corridor stretches ahead, lined with doors that look identical, except for the mysterious stains and the small, too-low windows that let in exactly 0 sunlight. You're handed a blanket that feels like it's been washed exactly once in 1827. Your bed is a narrow, lumpy affair bolted to the floor, designed for safety, but mostly just perfect for collecting every cold draft in the building. The pillow is an afterthought, thin, damp, and with a smell that can only be described as historically accurate. On your first night, you lie awake, cataloguing every noise, creaks, distant shouts, the steady drip of a leaky roof somewhere in the West Wing, the symphony of sleeplessness. Your roommate, if you have one, is a wild card. Maybe it's an elderly woman who mutters about the Crimean War. Maybe it's a young man who spends his time stacking bits of bread in geometric patterns. No judgment here. After all, everyone's in for something, and everyone's pretending it's not as bad as it is. Conversation is awkward. Trust takes time. There's no telling if you'll end up with a friend, an enemy, or just someone who snores louder than the chapel bell. Let's talk about the daily routine. The good news is you don't have to plan your day. The asylum's clockwork does that for you. Rise at dawn to the clanging of a bell. The nurse on duty, with an apron starched to the consistency of plywood, comes by to make sure you're awake and, if needed, still alive. Breakfast is a surprise. Cold porridge, sometimes gruel, occasionally something unidentifiable with the texture of wet paper. You eat it because you have to, not because you want to. After breakfast, it's time for the first therapeutic activity. This might be a silent walk around the garden, don't touch the flowers, a group prayer, or, if you're especially unlucky, bath day. Bath day is not a spa experience. The water is cold enough to shock the hope out of you. The soap is best described as optional, and privacy is non-existent. If you don't cooperate, there's always a nurse with strong opinions on personal hygiene and stronger arms. The staff. The staff. Some are kind, in the brisk, distant way that says they've seen it all. Others are here to enforce rules and remind you that emotional outbursts are discouraged. They move through the halls like ghosts with clipboards, jotting notes whenever someone looks too cheerful, too sad, or too opinionated. Every so often, the doctor arrives for his rounds, eyes narrowed, looking for signs of progress, which is code for sitting quietly and not complaining about the brick wall view. Personal belongings are limited. Maybe you're allowed a book, maybe a Bible. Letters from home are heavily censored for your own good. The idea is to keep your mind from overstimulation. In practice, it means you have a lot of time to stare at the ceiling and count the cracks, which is at least a distraction from counting the days. Despite the gloom, there's an odd sense of community, equal parts camaraderie and commiseration. People whisper stories in the halls, trade rumors about escape attempts, and even find small moments of humor. Someone leaves a daisy on your windowsill. Someone else scrawls a joke on the back of a meal ticket. It's not much, but in a place like this, it's everything. And as you finally drift off on your lumpy mattress, brick wall glowing in the moonlight, you realize the asylum is less a place for healing and more a place for waiting. Waiting for news, for improvement, for a little more sunlight, or maybe just for a warmer blanket and a breakfast that doesn't crunch. Welcome home. The men in charge have enormous beards, a fondness for complicated words, and a general aversion to joy. Their main qualification, a diploma and the ability to look wise while prescribing vinegar foot baths. The men in charge have enormous beards, a fondness for complicated words, and a general aversion to joy. Their main qualification, a diploma and the ability to look wise while prescribing vinegar foot baths. Let's set the scene. You're sitting stiffly in the consultation room. Really just a gloomy office with a blossed wall, faint aroma of pickled onions, when in glides Dr. Archibald Thistlethwaite, MD, CFS, certifiable facial hair specialist. His beard arrives 3 seconds before he does. It billows. It commands respect. It probably has its own monocle. His eyes are sharp, his expression severe, and his handshake is as dry as the medical journal he wrote last month on the therapeutic effects of celery. Dr. Thistlethwaite peers at you over tiny spectacles, pen poised above a very official-looking notebook. He asks if your dreams have been vivid, if your nerves feel unsettled, and whether you've recently felt a great disturbance in your spleen. Every symptom, no matter how mundane, is matched to a Latin phrase and a treatment that sounds suspiciously like a dare. Headaches? That's cephalalgia, best managed with a scalp blister. Persistent sadness? Melancholia requires leeching, bed rest, and, ideally, less poetry. Anxiety? Nerves, prescribed with a patented electric tonic, which is just code for a small, disappointing jolt. You quickly learn the most dangerous thing you can do in a Victorian asylum is provide too much information. These doctors are always looking for patterns, not in your behavior, but in your chart. They love nothing more than a mystery. Why did the patient sigh on Thursday? Dr. Thistlethwaite asks his junior, who immediately begins sketching a flowchart linking lunar cycles, indigestion, and your taste in hats. Their medical journals are filled with the greatest hits of nonsense. The prognostic value of nose temperature in nervous disorders, or on the curative power of prolonged staring. In a world before Google, medical research means talking at length to your colleagues in a gentleman's club, scribbling notes between cigars, and calling it peer review. And, of course, the sideburns. Victorian medicine is about 20% clinical observation and 80% how impressive your facial hair can look while you explain the dangers of overexertion of the mind. If your doctor can twirl his mustache while diagnosing your existential malaise, He's considered a man at the very peak of his profession. The treatments? Picture a pharmaceutical fever dream. Laudanum for your nerves, mercury for your headaches, and arsenic pills for everything else. If it can be dissolved in gin, it's probably in the dispensary. These men love a cure that stings, burns, or ideally, produces an immediate and impressive rash. They believe in balancing your humors, and if that means draining a pint of blood, so be it. More radical ideas, like fresh air or compassion, are greeted with skepticism and a stern warning about unruly optimism. Their bedside manner is something to behold. Sympathy is administered in the same way as a cold compress, sparingly and only in emergencies. They don't want you to be comfortable. Comfort breeds laziness. And laziness is, of course, a gateway to madness. If you're lucky, you get a pat on the shoulder and a cryptic remark about the restorative powers of boiled cabbage. Consultations are performed with an audience of junior doctors, all scribbling notes and trying desperately to match their mentor's beard density. You are, in effect, a living case study, one whose chief utility is to inspire future generations of men with impressive side parts and unreadable handwriting. And then there's the annual conference, where the city's leading alienists gather to discuss the latest advances. Spinning chairs, electrified baths, and that exciting new development, ice water for the soul. They trade stories, swap mustache wax, and quietly compete for the year's most creative diagnosis. So if you ever find yourself across the desk from a man with a beard so magnificent it could have its own postal address, be careful what you say. In Victorian England, the doctor's word is law, and your fate might depend on how convincingly you pretend to be both grateful for the vinegar foot bath and too intimidated to ask for a second opinion. For those days when you just can't with reality, the straitjacket is the go-to. Fashion-forward, breathable, and perfect for not being able to itch your nose. It's like a hug, if the hug lasted 6 hours and left creases. Let's set the scene. You've been a bit too animated in the dining hall, or perhaps you voiced a strong opinion about the gruel's temperature, and suddenly Nurse Beatrice is rolling up her sleeves. The next thing you know, you're being fitted for the latest in institutional haute couture. The straitjacket, also known as the strong jacket if you're feeling particularly Victorian, awaits. It's constructed from layers of sturdy canvas, reinforced with leather straps, and a design philosophy based on maximum control, minimal dignity. Putting it on is a group activity. 2 attendants, sometimes 3, maneuver you into the sleeves, then wrap, buckle, and tie until you resemble a slightly anxious burrito. The jacket's sleeves cross in front of your body and fasten behind your back, presumably so you can contemplate your life choices without the dangerous distraction of moving your arms. There's a special satisfaction the staff gets from cinching the straps just tight enough to make you reconsider complaining next time. It's all for your own good, of course. Once you're inside, a new world of sensory deprivation opens up. Need to scratch your nose? Too bad. Want to adjust your hair? Not today. Fancy a dramatic gesticulation? Save it for your memoirs. Your arms, once tools of self-expression, are now a neatly folded suggestion that maybe it's time to work on your posture. If you ever dreamed of becoming a mummy but with more institutional oversight, congratulations, you've arrived. Victorian medical theory held that the straitjacket was a merciful alternative to chains. Humane restraint, they called it, while flipping through catalogues for even more complicated buckles. The idea was to prevent self-harm and excessive stimulation, but in practice, it mainly prevented your circulation and any chance of fidgeting your way to freedom. The longer you're in, the more you start to appreciate things you never thought you'd miss, like scratching, stretching, or waving at passing doctors with that subtle "please help me" energy. The straitjacket quickly becomes the default answer for any difficult behavior. Too agitated? Jacket. Too quiet? Jacket. Too skilled at escaping the previous jacket? Surprise. Double jacket. Rumor has it that the really advanced models come with decorative embroidery, but you suspect this is just an asylum myth, invented to keep spirits up during group therapy, which, incidentally, you're still required to attend, even if you have to clap with your knees. Your fellow patients swap survival tips. The first rule, don't fight it. The second rule, practice patience. The third rule, develop a zen-like appreciation for immobility. It's said that after a few hours in the stute jacket, you can meditate so deeply that you forget your own last name. At least, that's the hope. If nothing else, the jacket serves as a handy excuse when the staff discovers you haven't completed your embroidery sampler. Sorry, doctor. Can't thread a needle if you're trussed up like a Sunday roast. Time moves strangely in a straitjacket. You become hyper-aware of every sound, footsteps, distant conversations, the squeak of a cart rolling down the corridor. Eventually, someone remembers to unbuckle you, and your arms tingle with pins and needles, like waking up from a nap on the world's least ergonomic futon. Your reward? A brisk checkup, a brisker lecture, and a reminder that the straitjacket is always hanging nearby, just in case. So the next time you're struggling with reality and think, maybe I just need a weighted blanket, remember, Victorians perfected the concept, minus the comfort, minus the choice, and with a few extra straps for good measure. In the asylum, it's always in style, always one step away, and always, somehow, a little bit too snug. Prepare for the cold bath, Victorian code for let's see how fast we can turn your lips blue. Supposedly it's therapeutic, but mostly it's an endurance contest against hypothermia. No rubber duckies, just existential dread. Let's set the scene. It's barely sunrise, and already you hear the telltale sound of Nurse Gwendolyn rolling a tin bath down the hall, its wheels squealing in the universal language of not again. You know what's coming? The daily aquatic inquisition. You shuffle down the hall, clutching your regulation issue towel, praying that today might be the day someone accidentally fills the tub with lukewarm water. It isn't. The bath itself is a marvel of 19th century optimism, deep enough to lose your dignity, shallow enough to keep your expectations low. The water is not just cold, it's primordial. There's a chance it's been harvested straight from the Thames, or, worse, from a rain barrel out back that's doubled as a bird bath and a frog spa. The first whiff tells you all you need to know. Cleansing isn't the priority, character building is. The attendants, always chipper at this ungodly hour, explain that the shock of cold water will invigorate your humors and restore balance to the mind. What it really does is make you reconsider every decision that led to this point, starting with that unfortunate incident at dinner last Tuesday. One brisk dunk and you're instantly alert, heart pounding, soul temporarily vacating your body for warmer climes. You lower yourself into the tub, slowly, as dignity allows, only to discover that cold is a charitable description. It's a liquid winter. You try to breathe, but your lungs decide it's safer to wait until you're out. The sensation is part physical torture, part spiritual reckoning. For the staff, it's a treat. For you, it's a trust exercise with fate. And fate is feeling mischievous this morning. As you sit shivering, you're told not to struggle, not to cry, and definitely not to splash. The theory is that calm, still immersion will soothe the mind. The reality is that you're counting ceiling cracks and questioning whether sanity is actually worth it. Occasionally, Another patient is escorted in. Misery loves company, especially when the company is also blue and chattering like an agitated squirrel. Why such aquatic cruelty? Victorian medicine believed madness was a form of overheating, an excess of inner fire. The solution? Submerge the afflicted in water cold enough to extinguish both symptoms and hope. For some, this hydrotherapy meant a few brisk baths a week. For the especially troubled, it could mean hours in a tub, weighted blankets across the chest to keep you from escaping into the marginally warmer hallway. The staff, meanwhile, hover nearby, timing your soak and offering helpful comments like, "You'll thank us for this," or "It's character building," and "Don't mind the purple lips, that's a good sign." You dream of towels, of hot tea, of even the smallest patch of sunlight. Instead, you get a brisk pat-down with a towel that could exfoliate barnacles off a ship, and a fresh reminder to try harder at cheerfulness. Of course, there are rules. You're not allowed to fidget, splash, or protest. Each one earns a disapproving look, and perhaps a longer soak next time. If you try to argue that this isn't helping, you're told it's proof of your illness. The system is a marvel of circular logic and endless towels. And when finally you're released from the tub, you stagger back to your room, slightly cleaner, much colder, and with a renewed appreciation for all things dry. You wrap yourself in a blanket and vow that if you ever see a bath again, it will be on your terms, with bubbles, and at a temperature suitable for mammals. Until then, you face each new bath day with resignation, a stiff upper lip, and the knowledge that no matter how chilly your future, at least it probably won't involve a nurse with a stopwatch and a grudge. Bath time, the Victorian path to health, or at least humility. Meals are a highlight if you enjoy thin porridge and bread hard enough to be classified as weaponry. Refuse to eat? That's fine. They'll just assist with a funnel. Who needs autonomy when you have a nutritious paste? It's breakfast in the Victorian asylum, which is less good morning and more. Please lower your expectations. You shuffle into the dining hall, a cavernous room echoing with the clatter of wooden bowls and the resigned sighs of your fellow patients. The air is thick with the unmistakable aroma of something boiled for several days longer than strictly necessary. If you close your eyes and try really hard, you might imagine oatmeal, but open your eyes and reality returns. It's gruel again. Thin, grey, and mysteriously free of anything resembling flavour, except perhaps for a hint of regret. Your spoon bends slightly as you attempt to scoop up what passes for nutrition. Across the table, a fellow inmate valiantly tries to soften a chunk of bread in their bowl, but the crust resists with the tenacity of a Victorian landlord during rent week. "Chew carefully," whispers someone who has clearly lost a tooth to this breakfast already. You do your best. Every meal feels like a minor contest between your digestive system and the kitchen's latest interpretation of edible. Lunch is not much of an improvement. Sometimes you're treated to soup, which is mostly water with a hint of turnip and the occasional floating mystery bit that might have once aspired to be a carrot. The bread is back, unchanged, immune to the passage of time or attempts at dunking. If you're lucky, there's a smear of margarine. If you're very unlucky, it's lard. On festive occasions, you may be presented with what's called a cutlet, which is best described as meat-adjacent. For dinner, the excitement builds. Could it be something new? No, it is not. It's more gruel, perhaps with a sprinkle of something green for variety. But don't ask what it is. The dining experience is less about enjoying food and more about enduring it with stoic resignation. The staff stand by, making sure everyone eats up. If you hesitate, or worse, complain, the matron approaches, funnel in hand. Assisted feeding is brisk, undignified, and accompanied by a lecture about the importance of nourishment. In this house, your opinions on flavor are not required. This culinary monotony is no accident. Victorian doctors believed bland, simple food would help calm excitable minds. Too much seasoning, they worried, and you might develop dangerous ideas, or at the very least, an opinion about the chef's use of salt. And so, the gruel continues, bowl after bowl, day after day. Meals are served with military precision and the emotional warmth of a tax audit. If you linger too long over your food, an attendant will remind you that there are others waiting, which is true, and not just for the food, but for any fleeting hope of pleasure in daily life. Occasionally, you'll hear rumors of a patient smuggling in a real apple or a nurse sharing a secret biscuit. These stories are traded like currency. A piece of fruit is cause for celebration. A lump of sugar, the stuff of legend. You begin to dream not of escape, but of butter, jam, maybe a fresh roll that doesn't double as a blunt instrument. And yet, even in this dreary parade of tasteless mush, there's camaraderie. Someone cracks a joke about the soup. Someone else tries to carve their initials in the bread. For science. You bond, not over gourmet delights, but the universal suffering that is institutional cuisine. So you take another bite, chew with care, and marvel at the human spirit's ability to adapt, even to 3 meals a day of culinary disappointment. If nothing else, the gruel builds character. And jaw strength. Lots and lots of jaw strength. Congratulations, you're a woman in the 19th century. Hysteria covers everything from ambition to boredom. The cure? Anything from bed rest to awkward massages performed by a doctor who's just invented a new medical device. Let's rewind. It's 1855. You wake up, sigh, and mention over breakfast that you wish you could read more novels. Instantly, your mother looks at you as though you've just confessed to highway robbery. If you're a little too lively, you're excitable. If you're quiet, you're withdrawn. And if you dare to suggest you're tired of mending socks all day, you might as well check yourself into the nearest sanatorium. The official term is hysteria, and its unofficial definition is existing while female and not always smiling. Victorian medicine, brimming with optimism and wild guesses, is ready to help. Your local doctor, who almost certainly sports a beard capable of nesting small birds, arrives with a notebook and a sense of duty. He asks probing questions. Have you felt restless? Have you experienced a fluttering in your chest? Do you sometimes have thoughts, feelings, or preferences? Each yes is another strike against you. Even menstruation is suspicious. Something to be monitored, charted, and, if possible, suppressed. If you're unmarried and over the age of 25, well, let's just say your odds of being diagnosed have now gone up 40%. The diagnosis is both broad and vague. Hysteria can mean anything from headaches and insomnia to fits of laughter, a desire to go for long walks, or just an interest in not eating more boiled cabbage. Actual science is minimal. Diagnosis is largely based on your ability to confuse, irritate, or simply outlast the family doctor. Once you're labeled, the treatments begin. Some are fairly benign, lots of rest, soothing herbal teas, and total avoidance of excitement. Goodbye, embroidery competitions. You're encouraged to lie in bed for days at a time, doing absolutely nothing, which turns out to be both as boring as it sounds and the perfect way to make you even more anxious. But the Victorians never leave a bad idea alone. Enter the pelvic massage, a real, medically prescribed procedure. The theory? Your womb has wandered off. No, really, doctors believed in wandering womb syndrome, causing chaos throughout your body. The solution? Coax it back with manual therapy. Many a well-meaning doctor developed a special massaging device, the world's least romantic invention, to help induce what they delicately called a paroxysm. Modern translation, the world's first vibrator. If you're blushing, imagine how the Victorians felt, which is why this was all described in the vaguest possible medical terms. Of course, not all treatments were so hands-on. Some favored hydrotherapy, cold baths. Again, others prescribed walks in the countryside, light reading, nothing too exciting, of course, and a strict diet of bland food. If you were considered particularly hysterical, you might be given laudanum or even a mild electric shock. Nothing says relax like Victorian DIY neurology. Your family, meanwhile, worries in the most counterproductive ways. Relatives come to visit, speaking in hushed voices about delicate nerves and female troubles. Your only real sin is that you live in an age when boredom, frustration, or ambition in a woman is more terrifying than actual illness. The menfolk nod solemnly while the women exchange the secret, exhausted looks of those who know this could happen to anyone. All it takes is a few off days or a single bad mood. In the end, your recovery depends less on medicine and more on patience, yours and everyone else's. Most women improve by learning to appear just happy enough, just quiet enough, just harmless enough to be allowed out for a Sunday stroll. And if that doesn't work, well, there's always another diagnosis waiting. So if you're a woman in the 19th century, remember, don't be too loud, don't be too quiet, don't want too much, and above all, try not to have any emotions at all. It's the surest cure for hysteria, at least until the next doctor's visit. When men lose it, it's nervous, exhaustion, or overwork. The solution: cigars, holidays, and being told how brave you are. If only women could be so lucky. Your holiday is a private room with extra locks. Let's set the mood. You are Mr. Henry Featherstone, solicitor, upstanding pillar of society and, though you'd never admit it out loud, absolutely shattered. The city is loud, the paperwork endless, and your doctor's handwriting is so bad it could be a new language. But lately, you find yourself staring blankly out of carriage windows, contemplating the mysteries of your shoelaces, and sighing just a bit too often at the breakfast table. Your wife worries, your colleagues whisper, and your mother-in-law drops hints about the family tendency. You don't dare call it madness. After all, you're a man, and men don't go mad. They simply become nervous. Overwork, the doctor declares, nodding with the gravity of a man who prescribes rest for a living. Nervous exhaustion, he adds, as if coining a phrase that could save you from actual diagnosis. And just like that, you're off the hook. There's no talk of asylums or shame, just the gentle suggestion that you spend more time in the countryside, breathing in good English air. Your prescription is a complete list of things women in your life are never offered. A few weeks at a seaside resort, a daily cigar, a healthy glass of port, and, if you play your cards right, a recommendation to avoid any and all forms of household stress. The modern equivalent would be calling in sensitive at work and being handed a vacation and a trophy. Your friends, naturally, are supportive. At the gentlemen's club, they discuss their own brushes with nerves. One confesses to needing 3 extra brandies a night, another to extended sojourns in Bath, all under doctor's orders. A very modern condition, says your barber, clipping your hair with an approving nod. Even Prince Albert gets tired, he adds, as if royal malaise is the ultimate seal of normalcy. Compare this to your sister's experience. She writes a letter saying she can't sleep, and suddenly everyone is discussing her delicate constitution behind closed doors. Suggestions range from stronger tea to full institutionalization. You, on the other hand, receive sympathy, soft lighting, and perhaps a congratulatory handshake for your fortitude in the face of adversity. You're working too hard, everyone insists, while quietly admiring your stiff upper lip. Victorian society loves the idea of the overworked man. It's a badge of honor, a byproduct of ambition, proof that you're contributing to the relentless progress of the empire. Your symptoms, therefore, are not a weakness, but a testament to your sacrifice. Feeling burnt out? That's just the price of success. In fact, some men begin to cultivate their nervous complaints, trotting them out at dinner parties the way others might show off new cufflinks. It's an art form. My nerves are so sensitive, I had to take the waters in Switzerland. I was so overworked, my physician recommended a month in Nice. The only real competition is whose nerves are most fashionably frayed. The treatments, as you might guess, are spectacularly pleasant. Doctor's orders: avoid any distressing topics. No arguments, no bills, and definitely no children's recitals. If you feel a twinge of anxiety, light a cigar. If you can't sleep, have a glass of sherry. Need to recharge? Take a carriage ride into the country and contemplate the sheep, who don't seem to worry about much at all. You're encouraged to recover, not punished for faltering. Meanwhile, the women in your life, suffering equally or worse, are told to lie down, keep quiet, and, if they don't recover quickly, accept rest cures that feel more like solitary confinement than a spa weekend. Their nerves are a moral failing. Yours a sign you cared too much. It's not fair, it's not logical, but it's profoundly Victorian. So you light your cigar, toast your fragile constitution, and make a mental note to never, ever suggest your wife needs a break. In the world of Victorian nerves, breakdowns are for men, lockups for women, and the only thing everyone has in common is a chronic shortage of understanding. Some asylums go for the moral treatment approach. Less torture, more tedium. Your day is a never-ending parade of chores, wholesome walks, and lectures about personal responsibility, administered by someone who's never done laundry. Welcome to the progressive wing of the Victorian asylum, where the doctors have decided that being humane mostly means being busy. Here, instead of being chained to a bed or doused in freezing water, you're handed a broom and told to find purpose. Your diagnosis hasn't changed, but your daily schedule now reads like an optimistic boarding school prospectus. If boarding school had more locked doors and slightly less pudding, the philosophy behind moral treatment is simple. Structure, order, and routine can restore balance to the troubled mind. The asylum becomes a clockwork world, where every hour is accounted for and every activity has a slightly patronizing name. Breakfast is nutritive engagement. Cleaning the hallways is environmental improvement therapy. Mending socks for the staff? That's developing useful skills. And if you sweep a little too enthusiastically, you might even get a commendation. Plus the privilege of dusting the doctor's study. The staff presides over all this with an air of cheery determination. The matron keeps a ledger of chores done, and chores done with a good attitude. The doctor's assistant leads the walks, marching the whole ward in formation through the gardens, rain, shine. No talking, but plenty of time to contemplate the wisdom of cabbage. Someone's always reminding you that idleness is the root of all insanity. So, if you so much as pause to look at a cloud, you'll be gently redirected toward the compost heap. Therapy comes in the form of endless, earnest discussions about responsibility and virtue. At morning assembly, you gather with the other residents to hear a heartfelt reading from the latest treatise on the value of temperance or the importance of folding towels with humility. You are encouraged to reflect, to confess your laziness, and to pledge to do better. The lectures are given by someone who has, without irony, never operated a mop. Walking, meanwhile, is a cornerstone of moral treatment. You're encouraged to walk in circles around the garden. The exercise considered a tonic for everything from gloom to grand delusions. Occasionally, you're joined by a staff member who asks deeply personal questions about your feelings, only to respond with, now, let's focus on the roses. The path winds endlessly, and you suspect it was designed more to tire you out than to inspire insight. Meals, too, are a lesson in restraint and self-discipline. Seconds are for the virtuous. Dessert is rumored to exist, but only for those who demonstrate progress. Conversation is carefully monitored. Laughter is considered suspicious, while polite silence earns you a gold star on the chart. You learn quickly to temper any outbursts and save your sarcasm for the broom closet. Evenings bring a new round of self-improvement. Reading aloud from moral literature, group prayer, and, if you're lucky, a stirring performance of Why Cleanliness is Next to Godliness by the enthusiastic, if not especially musical, night nurse. You fall into bed exhausted, but also, somehow, still profoundly bored. Yet, for all its tedium, moral treatment is an improvement over previous methods. At least you're not being spun in a chair until you're dizzy or strapped to a bed for the crime of speaking your mind. There's dignity in routine, a strange camaraderie in collective boredom, and the faint hope that, one day, you might be promoted to head of silverware polishing, a coveted title with almost no actual power. So you sweep, walk, and moralize, learning that sometimes the cure for madness isn't shock or punishment, but simply the relentless, comforting predictability of daily life, plus a solid appreciation for the art of towel folding. A few brilliant minds think mental illness can be zapped away. Enter the era of electrotherapy, where a mild jolt to the skull is supposed to reset your attitude. If it doesn't work, at least you can say you've seen sparks. Let's set the wires. It's 1870, and you're sitting in a rather chilly examination room, facing a device that looks like a cross between a music box, a sewing machine, and an instrument of vague but imminent doom. Your doctor, eyes alight with scientific fervor and eyebrows arched so high they threaten to leave his forehead, assures you this is cutting-edge technology. You nod, mostly because you've already been told resistance is a symptom. Electrotherapy, or as it's often called, medical optimism with batteries, is the latest rage among the Victorian alienists. These men are convinced that the brain is a sort of electrical storm, and a carefully administered zap can jolt you out of melancholia, anxiety, or whatever else has landed you on their examination table. They wheel in their most prized possession, a gleaming electrostatic generator, complete with spinning arms, crackling rods, and enough copper wire to run the world's least cozy Christmas tree. Your treatment begins with an elaborate ritual. Sleeves are rolled up, copper plates are polished, and a nurse, always the one with the steadiest hand, dabs your temples with vinegar to improve conduction. You're told to think peaceful thoughts. Easy enough until you see the size of the electrodes. They clamp onto your head with all the tenderness of a startled crab. The doctor flips a switch. There's a whirring, and suddenly your teeth are buzzing like a poorly tuned harpsichord. The goal is to realign your nervous energy. What you feel is more along the lines of startling discomfort with a side of existential regret. Your fingers twitch, your vision blurs, and for a fleeting moment, you understand why Victorian wallpaper was so busy. It gave the brain something else to focus on besides the tingling sensation now dancing across your scalp. The doctor watches you, jotting down notes like mood, still unpredictable, and hair, slightly singed. The treatments are short but memorable. If you're lucky, you get away with just a tingle and a lingering suspicion that your eyebrows have moved. If you're less lucky, you might feel your entire arm spasm or find yourself humming like a tuning fork at supper. Still, You're congratulated for your bravery. And, in some cases, given a biscuit. After all, nothing says medical miracle like cookies for the recently zapped. But the Victorian fascination with electricity doesn't stop at the skull. Electrotherapy is soon applied to everything. Sore backs, insomnia, even wandering womb syndrome. There's a special setting for every ailment. And every doctor swears by their own technique. A bit more voltage for sadness, just a tickle for nerves. If you express doubts, they'll assure you Thomas Edison himself is probably doing this somewhere right now. If you survive your treatment without bursting into actual flames, you're deemed a candidate for further experiments. There's always a new gadget on the horizon, electrified baths, shock belts, even a miraculous helmet guaranteed to boost both your mood and your hat size. You become a minor celebrity among the staff for your tolerance, and they whisper about your exceptionally conductive personality. The most shocking part? None of this is done out of cruelty. The doctors genuinely believe they're helping. They're so hopeful, so convinced that progress is measured in volts and sparkles, that you almost feel bad complaining. Almost. So you return to your ward, hair a little wild, outlook only marginally improved, and you marvel at the relentless Victorian faith in technology. After all, you may not feel better, but at least you can light up a room, sometimes literally, if you shuffle your feet just right. In the asylum, that's about as close to a breakthrough as anyone gets. Modern medicine, Victorian style, opiates, mercury pills, and anything that makes you see double. Side effects include euphoria, confusion, and occasionally turning blue. Refills available if you survive the first dose. Let's peek into the medicine cabinet, shall we? The shelves are stacked with glass bottles and tins, each more mysterious and alarming than the last. There's a faint aroma of spirits, camphor, and something that could be either menthol or rat poison. It's really anyone's guess. The resident doctor, full of confidence and armed with a handwritten prescription, hands you a tiny bottle of laudanum with a reassuring nod. Take as needed for sleep, pain, sadness, or if you're simply too aware of your surroundings. Laudanum is the Victorian catch-all, a mix of opium and alcohol. It comes highly recommended by everyone from poets to anxious housewives to the man who just tripped over his own feet in the garden. A few drops in your tea and the world becomes pleasantly blurred. The only real downside is addiction, which the Victorians cheerfully ignore in favor of a good night's sleep, and the ability to zone out during particularly long sermons. If laudanum isn't quite your thing, there's always mercury. Yes, mercury. The same stuff you're now warned never to touch, much less ingest. Victorian physicians prescribe it for everything from constipation to blockages of the mind. The result? Well, let's just say it moves things along. Side effects include trembling hands, suspicious sweating, and the possibility of waking up with the urge to compose long, rambling letters to the Queen. It's medicine, but with a strong emphasis on the die in remedy. Not to be outdone, there's arsenic. Yes, arsenic, the poison. Victorian medicine doesn't discriminate between cure and curse. Microdoses of arsenic are prescribed for everything from nervous excitement to skin conditions. Supposedly, it gives you a healthy glow and invigorates the spirit. The fact that it might also thin your hair, ruin your teeth, and occasionally put you in an early grave is, apparently, just a minor inconvenience. Herbal remedies are everywhere too. If you're lucky, your treatment might be as gentle as valerian or lavender. If not, you get a blend of foxglove, digitoxin for the heart, belladonna, deadly nightshade, popular for its lovely but mildly poisonous effects, or syrup of squills, think, spicy cough syrup with extra hallucinations. The pharmacy is less a place of healing and more a test of how well your liver can adapt to new and exciting toxins. Every new prescription is an adventure. Pills are made by hand, sometimes rolled on the same table where last night's dinner was served. Tinctures are poured by the spoonful, and doses are measured with impressive optimism. The only real rule: if it tastes terrible, it must be doing you some good. If you feel worse after, well, perhaps your humours just weren't ready for such progress. The doctor's rounds include cheerful inquiries about how your tongue looks, checking for mercury burns, whether you can still see out of both eyes, arsenic again, and if you're feeling pleasantly drowsy, laudanum's time to shine. Medical records are full of hopeful notations. Patient feeling improved, though somewhat blue around the edges. Appetite diminished. Spirit invigorated. Prescribed a smaller dose. After Mrs. Pennington attempted to recite the Magna Carta backwards. Occasionally, someone suggests that clean air, decent food, or a bit of rest might help. This is met with a polite cough and a renewed prescription for something pungent and vaguely radioactive. Victorian progress marches on, one dangerous pill at a time. So, you take your medicine, hope for the best, and keep your fingers crossed that the side effects are temporary and the colour returns to your cheeks and nowhere else. Because in the asylum, relief is always just a bottle away if you can handle a little bit of poison with your pudding. Sleep tight. The answer to female ambition. The rest cure. You get a bed, no books, and 0 visitors. The goal is to achieve a level of boredom so powerful. Even your symptoms take a nap out of self-defense. Picture this. You've dared to want something in life, maybe to write a poem, take a walk alone, or ask what's for dinner. In the Victorian world, these are dangerous ideas. The doctor arrives with an expression of deep concern and the air of someone who just solved the riddle of the universe. Nerves, he declares. Exhaustion from modern life. You, my dear, need the rest cure. The rest cure is less treatment and more a sanctioned time-out for women who forgot to hide their intelligence. You're tucked into bed, windows shuttered, with only the occasional faint sound of footsteps in the corridor for company. You are not to read. You are not to write. No visitors, no letters, and absolutely no creative endeavours. Stimulation is the enemy, your nurse explains, as she confiscates your embroidery hoop with the care of someone handling unexploded ordnance. Meals are delivered on a strict schedule. Bland porridge for breakfast, weak broth for lunch, and possibly a potato for dinner, if the kitchen staff is feeling generous. Eating is your one sanctioned activity, and even then, only slowly, without excitement. You are weighed and measured, and your pulse is checked daily, mostly for signs of rebellion. Every time you look like you might have an independent thought, you're offered more milk and ordered to rest. Your days stretch into an endless loop of monotony. Wake up, lie down, eat something flavourless, try not to think, repeat. Occasionally you're encouraged to turn over in bed, just to make sure you don't get bed sores. The nurse hovers at the door, guarding your room with the intensity of a bouncer at an exclusive club for the utterly motionless. The philosophy behind the rest cure is both grand and deeply suspicious. Developed by Dr. Silas Weir Mitchell, a man who believed the only thing standing between women and recovery was their own tendency to think. This cure promised to restore equilibrium. What it really did was create a generation of women who could write entire novels in their heads while staring at cracks in the ceiling. And in fact, Charlotte Perkins Gilman's famous short story, The Yellow Wallpaper, is basically a rest cure fever. Dream with more wallpaper and fewer potatoes. If you protest, you're told that resistance is a symptom of your illness. Write a letter, clearly still unwell, Ask for a book? Even sicker. Try to leave your room? That's a sign you need more rest. It's the perfect circular logic. The less you want to participate, the more you need to be there. To keep you from completely fading into the wallpaper, the staff might allow a supervised stroll around the garden after several weeks of progress. Even then, you're warned not to get excited by the sight of a bird or the hint of a breeze. If you return looking even slightly energized, you're sent back to bed for additional repose. And if you are lucky enough to recover, it's not because the rest cure fixed you, it's because you learned to play the game. You practice the art of looking serene. You offer gentle, agreeable answers. You cultivate an air of cheerful emptiness that satisfies your doctor and gets you released back into polite society. Meanwhile, in your mind, you're already planning a revolution, one slow, restful day at a time. So, if you ever wonder what it's like to be so bored that your very symptoms give up, remember the rest cure. In Victorian times, the greatest threat to a woman's sanity was not madness, but the terrifying possibility of her own mind left to wander. Welcome to the cure, now. Go back to bed. High ceilings, echoing corridors, and windows that don't open. The building is designed for serenity, though the draft and the decor are straight out of bleak haunted house. Feng shui, this is not. High ceilings, echoing corridors, and windows that don't open. The building is designed for serenity, though the draft and the decor are straight out of bleak haunted house. Feng shui, this is not. Let's take a stroll, or shuffle, depending on your level of sedation, through the average Victorian asylum. From the outside, it's imposing. A looming hulk of stone perched on the outskirts of town, conveniently out of earshot of polite society. The main gates are so heavy and ornate, they could double as a drawbridge in a castle siege. The message is clear. Serenity begins at the property line and ends about 4 steps past the front door. Once inside, you're greeted by endless corridors. They stretch on forever, painted in the drabbest shades Victorian science could invent: mud, oatmeal, and sad beige. Each hallway is lined with identical doors, some leading to wards, others to mysterious storage rooms, and one always to a broom closet that has not seen a broom in decades. The floors echo with every step, turning even the gentlest shuffle into a one-person parade. If you're searching for privacy, you won't find it here. Voices and footsteps ricochet endlessly, blending into a white noise of institutional melancholy. Your room, should you be lucky enough to get one, is a masterpiece of therapeutic design, if the goal is mild claustrophobia. High, barred windows let in just enough light to remind you what you're missing. They don't open, ostensibly for your safety, but mainly to keep the fresh air and your hopes firmly outside. The bed is always under the window, presumably so you can gaze wistfully at a patch of sky and contemplate escape, or perhaps just estimate the weather for tomorrow's garden walk. The ceilings are tall, meant to give an airy, uplifting feeling. In reality, they simply create a perfect echo chamber for every cough, groan, and overzealous hymn from the neighboring ward. And because heating technology is several decades behind ambition, drafts swirl down from on high, chilling you in winter and making your teeth chatter like Morse code. Let's talk decor. The Victorian asylum is not a place for frills. The walls are adorned with exactly one piece of art, a faded print of some bucolic scene, forever crooked, and always just a little too small for the space. Otherwise, you get exposed plumbing, rusty radiators, and, if you're lucky, a rug that has survived several generations of questionable medical interventions. Communal spaces are, theoretically, designed for tranquility. There are sitting rooms, but the chairs are designed to be just uncomfortable enough to keep you from lingering. The gardens, meanwhile, are therapeutic. A few straggly rose bushes, a gravel path for walking in endless circles, and a suspiciously aggressive squirrel who seems to run the place. You are encouraged to enjoy the outdoors, but not too much. After all, the building is the real treatment. The logic of the asylum's design is based on the latest theories of the day. Fresh air, sort of natural light, filtered through unwashed glass. And order, so much order. Every space is symmetrical, every corner right-angled, as if madness could be banished by geometry. But serenity is hard to find when your only view is of another wing of the same building, and your only soundtrack is the rattling of pipes. At night, the architecture becomes even less soothing. Shadows collect in the corners. Gaslights flicker, making every corridor look like a set from an amateur ghost story. The echoes become more ominous, and the building creaks and settles, as if it too is trying to get comfortable and failing. So you wrap yourself in your scratchy blanket, look up at the towering ceiling, and wonder who thought any of this would help anyone heal. In the Victorian asylum, the architecture is less a path to serenity and more a gentle reminder that sometimes design is just another word for good luck. Nurses range from angelic to absolutely not paid enough for this. Some hand out comfort, others hand out enemas. You learn quickly who brings the gruel and who brings the rope. Let's take a tour through the true power structure of the Victorian asylum, the staff. The first thing you notice is the uniform. Starched aprons, sensible shoes, and keys that jingle ominously from every belt. The head nurse is a legend, equal parts matron, and military commander. She has eyes in the back of her head, an uncanny knack for appearing whenever you even think about skipping your chores, and a voice that could cut through 3 feet of institutional fog. There are, of course, the kind ones. Nurse Harriet, for example, who slips you an extra pat of butter when no one's watching, and will adjust your blanket with the gentlest touch. She knows everyone's story, real and imagined, and never asks questions she doesn't already know the answer to. When Nurse Harriet is on duty, the ward feels just a touch warmer, the gruel a touch less grey. She's the closest thing you'll get to family in here. But for every Nurse Harriet, there's a Nurse Edwina. Edwina takes her job very seriously. She believes order is next to godliness and seems to keep a secret scorecard of minor infractions. Cross her, and you're the first in line for a cold bath, a brisk scolding, or the world's most humiliating group walk. She is immune to charm, complaints, and the passage of time. The rumor is she was born in this building and will haunt it long after the last patient leaves. Then there are the young nurses and attendants, here for the wages, the references, or perhaps the faint hope that they're doing some good. Some are gentle, awkward, and soft-spoken, eager to help, but in way over their heads. Others are already jaded, whistling tunelessly as they wheel breakfast carts down the endless halls, or humming sad songs while mopping up what you hope is just tea. Let's not forget the male attendants, part nurse, part security guard. They're usually stationed at strategic points, doors, stairwells, the dining hall. Their job is to keep order, which sometimes means wrestling an agitated patient into a straitjacket, but more often means standing around with arms crossed, looking stern and bored in equal measure. Some are gentle giants who sneak you sweets. Others are just here for the power trip and the free meals. Doctors float in and out of the wards, trailed by nervous assistants and ever-present clouds of pipe smoke. They appear for rounds, peer into your soul, or just your chart, and dispense advice and prescriptions with the dispassionate confidence of men who'll never have to eat the gruel themselves. They might remember your name, especially if you're a difficult case. Mostly, though, it's the staff, nurses, attendants, orderlies, who shape your days. Routine is their mantra. Medication at 7, breakfast at 8, baths on Tuesdays, punishments on Fridays, and inspections whenever you least expect them. If you need something, you ask a nurse. If you need to avoid something, like another lecture on cheerfulness, you hide when the matron does her rounds. Yet for all the rigid discipline and the daily small indignities, the staff are not immune to the drudgery of asylum life. You catch them sharing a joke in the hallway, grumbling about the endless laundry, or occasionally breaking into song just to pass the time. It's in these unguarded moments that you remember they're just people, tired, underpaid, occasionally overwhelmed, and trapped by the same stone walls as everyone else. So you learn, patient by patient, to spot the kind eyes, dodge the quick tempers, and, when you hear a songbird's voice echo down the corridor, take comfort in knowing that even in a place built on routine and restraint, a little humanity can still sneak through. It's not enough to suffer. Your suffering is a tourist attraction. Respectable citizens stroll through the asylum, commenting on the unfortunates and making plans to come back next Sunday. Let's paint the scene. You're sitting in the corner of the day room, trying to keep a low profile and perhaps steal an extra crust of bread, when the front doors swing open and in pours a parade of curious faces, bonnets, top hats, and the occasional monocle gleaming with anticipation. These aren't new patients or even staff on an inspection. No, these are the good people of Victorian society, armed with opera glasses and an appetite for the strange. They've come for a day out at the asylum. Move over, museums and zoos. The latest entertainment is your personal breakdown. It's visiting day. And you know it's here not because of any calendar, but by the extra layer of polish on the hallways, and the sudden presence of potted plants meant to say, nothing odd happens here, not at all. The matron stands by the door, greeting guests with the poise of a theatre usher. Welcome. Yes, our residents are very peaceful today. Please refrain from feeding them sugar lumps. Groups shuffle through, whispering and pointing, their voices carrying as if you weren't right there. That one looks quite melancholy, a lady remarks, fanning herself vigorously. Such a shame, I hear she once played the pianoforte. A gentleman pauses at your table, observing you with the same interest he reserved for livestock auctions. I say, do you think they notice we're here? He asks his wife, as if you're a houseplant. For the more adventurous visitors, there are guided tours. This way, if you please. On your left, we have the chronic melancholics. And just ahead, the enthusiastic walkers. Children press sticky noses to the glass of the recreation hall, their governesses murmuring, "Now, be grateful you do your sums at home, darling." The children stare, wide-eyed, at the woman talking to her shoe or the man who insists he's the Duke of Wellington. One boy waves, just in case you wave back. The asylums of Victorian England don't just allow this kind of public outreach, they encourage it. It's all about transparency, after all. What better way to show society's compassion than by displaying its most unfortunate members for casual perusal? The underlying message is clear. Look, but don't linger. Empathize, but from a safe distance. You and your fellow patients, meanwhile, develop a sort of gallows humor. Some take to performing small acts for the crowd, reciting poems, bowing grandly, or pretending to be even stranger than usual just to see the visitors jump. Others simply retreat further inward, hoping to disappear into the pattern of the wallpaper. There are always a few who, despite it all, take pride in their unique notoriety. "Let them stare," one woman whispers. "At least someone knows I exist." The staff put on their best faces for the public. Nurses smile extra brightly. Attendants stand up a little straighter. And the doctor himself emerges from his study, puffing his chest and explaining the latest innovations in humane treatment. Just don't ask about bath day. Everyone is on their best behavior, except the pipes, which always choose this moment to rattle ominously. Eventually, the visitors wander off, satisfied with their brush with the peculiar. They'll go home, recount stories over dinner about the poor souls at the asylum, perhaps even donate a few coins to the hospital's charitable fund. The halls quiet down, the matron's smile relaxes, and you're left with only the echo of footsteps and the faint scent of perfume. So you tuck your bread crust a little closer, grateful for the peace, and wonder what other entertainments the world outside might offer next Sunday. In the asylum, even your pain is part of the spectacle. But at least, for a moment, you were the star of the show. Children aren't spared. A little too energetic? It's a diagnosis. The treatments are just as harsh, only now the gowns are smaller and the lectures are even less relevant. Welcome to the children's ward of the Victorian Asylum, a place where the definition of childhood mischief includes climbing trees, asking why more than once, or, heaven forbid, showing a talent for imaginary friends, one too many tantrums or an awkward silence at the dinner table, and suddenly your parents are being counseled by a doctor with a very serious beard about moral insanity in the young. Childhood is now a medical condition, and the prescription is equal parts bed, rest, baths, and the kind of discipline that could make a grown-up cry. Upon arrival, you're handed a tiny institutional gown, which manages to be both itchy and enormous at the same time. Your bed is a smaller, less comfortable version of the adult model, positioned strategically between the window, for good air, and the nurse's desk, for good supervision. Toys? Unthinkable. Reading material? Only if it's a moral lesson about not running indoors. Instead, you get a wooden spoon for meals and a comforting lecture on the dangers of excessive giggling. Let's talk about diagnosis. Too loud? Mania. Too quiet? Melancholia. Caught sleepwalking or talking to your pet rock? That's night terrors or imagination disorder. There's a label for every flavor of childhood energy, and each one seems to come with a matching set of punishments masquerading as treatment. The rest cure is a particular favorite. Bed rest, limited stimulation, and meals that look like someone's attempt at porridge sculpture. If you're lucky, you're permitted a slow walk around the garden. Strictly supervised, of course, lest you make eye contact with the roses. Bath time, as always, is an ordeal. The water is as cold as the nurse's stare, and there's no room for rubber duckies or bubbles. Just you, shivering, trying to keep your chin up and your teeth from rattling out of your head. The logic is unchanging. Cold water calms the humors, especially the playful ones. If you protest, that's further evidence of your condition. Discipline is ever present, administered with a spoonful of scolding and a dash of think about what you've done. The staff, convinced they're shaping the next generation of model citizens, enforce routines with military precision. Meals at the same time, walks at the same time, and bedtime earlier than you thought was legal possible. Any deviation, giggles, fidgets, the odd daydream, and you're getting a stern talking to about the dangers of idle hands. The only escape is through sleep. And even there, you're likely to dream of cabbage soup. Despite the gloom, there's a strange sense of camaraderie among the children. You band together for support, trading stories about the outside world. Did you know there are places where people eat fruit for breakfast? And whispering plans for great escapes that mostly involve getting past Nurse Edwina and her terrifyingly sharp hearing. You invent games with breadcrumbs and buttons, and share the occasional laugh when no one's looking. In a world designed to flatten every spark, you find ways to let a few slip through. Occasionally, someone's parent visits, bearing a lumpy, unripe apple or a book with all the fun pages ripped out. The visit is short, awkward, and leaves you with equal parts hope and disappointment. The days blur together, one long parade of lectures, naps, and the occasional thrilling adventure of laundry duty. But through it all, children remain, well, children. There's mischief and plotting, laughter in the shadows, and the kind of stubborn resilience that even the strictest nurse can't quite extinguish. Childhood in the asylum isn't childhood as it should be. But even here, tiny rebellions bloom, and the smallest smile can become the day's best medicine. Not everyone gets sent to an asylum. Some get hidden away at home, locked in an upstairs room so the neighbors won't gossip. You get a window, a Bible, and the chance to become local legend. Welcome to the attic suite. Slightly drafty, mostly forgotten, and home to 1,000 family secrets. The stairs creak in protest each time someone dares to climb them, and the key turns in the lock with the reassuring finality of out of sight, out of mind. The wallpaper peels in elegant curls, and you can count the seasons by how much dust settles on your windowsill. Downstairs, life carries on, tea is poured, gossip is exchanged, and your name is carefully avoided in polite conversation. Why the attic? Simple. In the Victorian era, nothing was more terrifying than scandal. Mental illness wasn't just a personal trial. It was a threat to the entire family's social standing. So if your anxieties were a little too visible, or your sadness a little too persistent, or your opinions a little too loud, you didn't get the dignity of treatment. You got seclusion, a locked door, and a view of the neighbor's rooftop. All in the name of privacy. Your world shrinks to 4 walls and the narrow rectangle of sunlight that creeps across the floor. Your meals arrive on a tray, carried up the stairs by a maid who's been instructed not to linger. She leaves the tray, takes away yesterday's untouched crusts, and, if she's feeling brave, sneaks you a smile or a scrap of last week's newspaper. You mark the days by the clatter of her shoes and the distant sound of the family's laughter wafting up from the parlor. Time moves differently here. There's the slow routine of looking out the window, reading your Bible, and waiting for someone to remember you exist. If you're especially fortunate, a sibling might visit, perching on the edge of the bed and making awkward conversation about the weather, the garden, or Aunt Beatrice's ongoing battle with indigestion. The visit ends with promises to return soon, which may or may not happen before the next season changes. Your isolation isn't entirely complete. You can hear the house breathing, the grandfather clock chiming in the hall, the whisper of dresses sweeping over floorboards, the muffled arguments and the odd outburst of piano practice from a cousin who'll never make the concert stage. These sounds become your companions, familiar as the cracks in the ceiling and the faded cross-stitch hanging by the bed. You are, in a way, a family ghost, present but never spoken of. The local children invent stories about the mysterious woman in the attic. Maybe you're a secret heiress, or a witch, or a tragic figure wronged by fate. The truth is simpler and sadder. You're just inconvenient in a society that prefers its problems be quietly contained. Occasionally, the doctor visits, usually a family friend, solemn and tight-lipped. He asks a few questions, checks your pulse, and reassures your relatives that the condition is stable. You're prescribed rest, quiet, and a firm avoidance of excitement. You suspect your medical notes are shorter than the shopping list. But even in solitude, the mind finds ways to wander. You invent stories about the lives below, dream up conversations you'll never have. And, if you're feeling rebellious, leave notes for the maid hidden in the hollow of the bedpost. Sometimes, you sing to yourself, just to hear a voice echo off the beams. Your world is small, but not empty. So you watch, you wait, and, over the years, you, become a legend in your own right. Maybe one day they'll write a novel about the mad woman in the attic. Until then, you have your window, your Bible, and the endless parade of clouds passing by. A reminder that even behind a locked door, you are still, stubbornly, alive. Public asylums for the poor mean bigger crowds, fewer blankets, and a pervasive smell of cabbage. If you're lucky, you get a window view. If you're unlucky, the window view is just the next building's wall. Welcome to the economy class of Victorian mental health care, where the only thing more crowded than the ward is the dinner queue. Your ticket to entry? Poverty, exhaustion, and the simple misfortune of needing help in an era when help is both scarce and suspiciously cabbage-flavored. If you came hoping for individualized care, prepare to be disappointed and possibly jostled by 8 other people just trying to get to the single-chamber pot. The intake process is brisk. Your name is added to a long list on a creased ledger, misspelled but enthusiastic. You're handed a blanket that might once have been blue, a bowl with a personality, and a stern warning to keep your voice down. Privacy is a luxury reserved for donors and dignitaries. Here, every thought, nightmare, and midnight cough is shared with 50 of your closest new friends. Your bunk is narrow, the mattress lumpy, and if the window opens at all, it's only to let in more cabbage fumes from the kitchen below. Meals are an exercise in both patience and jaw strength. Breakfast is gruel, lunch is gruel, and dinner is gruel masquerading as stew, all chased with water that tastes faintly of disappointment. The kitchen staff do their best, but the budget is tight, and so are the turnips. If you manage to secure an extra crust of bread, you guard it like treasure. Those who eat too slowly learn that the early bird gets the edible bits, while the latecomer gets a bowl best described as mostly memory foam. Daytime is a carefully orchestrated exercise in group suffering. The schedule is identical for all. Morning cleaning, afternoon walks, and endless waiting for your name to be called. Work therapy means scrubbing floors, tending sad little gardens, or folding laundry for people with fancier problems. Every task is supervised by a staff member who lost their sense of humor 2 careers ago. If you slack off, you're lectured about the moral value of labor. If you work too hard, you're reminded to save some energy for the next shift. There's no winning, but plenty of sweeping. The staff do their best, considering. Some are genuinely kind, sneaking you an extra spoonful of mush when the head matron isn't looking. Others treat the job like a competitive sport in sternness. Still, most are just as tired as the patients. After all, they too are poorly paid, overworked, and, in some cases, probably stuck eating cabbage at home. Camaraderie develops in small ways, a whispered joke, a shared sigh, or the free Verlieberungsverf, occasional rebellious act of smuggling in a piece of fruit. Sanitation is a suggestion, not a rule. Bath day arrives, and with it, a mad dash to the single functioning tub. The water starts out cold and only gets worse. Soap is rationed, towels are more idea than reality. You leave the bath cleaner but never truly clean, and your hair smells of lye for days. If you get sick, you queue up for the doctor, whose visits are rare and whose advice is universal: rest, gruel, and fresh air. Medicine is for emergencies. Everyone else gets platitudes and a pat on the shoulder. If you make noise about your condition, you're labeled a troublemaker. If you don't, you risk being forgotten entirely. The system isn't designed to heal, it's designed to contain. Still, there's a strange resilience among the working-class patients. You swap stories, share hopes, and develop a gallows humor so strong it could outlast the wallpaper. For every injustice, there's a moment of camaraderie, a flash of laughter, a whispered plan for better days. So you make do, find comfort where you can, and hope that, someday, care will mean more than just cabbage, crowds, and the world's draftiest window view. Until then, you hold on, together. Doctors never met a bad idea they didn't try at least once. Spinning chairs to redistribute blood, cupping, blistering, and the ever-popular leeches. Science or just a very strange hobby? Let's begin with the spinning chair, a favorite among Victorian alienists with a flair for the dramatic. Picture this. You, strapped firmly into what looks like a cross between an office chair and a torture device, while the doctor gives you a cheery nod. With a spin of the crank, you're sent twirling at dizzying speeds, your feet barely grazing the floor. The theory is that all this spinning rebalances the humors and shakes up the mind. The reality? It makes you regret last night's gruel and leaves you disoriented enough to forget why you ever complained in the first place. Some patients faint, some just lose their lunch, and all leave with a new appreciation for sitting still. Then, there's bloodletting, that eternal favorite. Feel anxious, sad, or have a rash? Clearly, you have too much blood. The solution: open a vein and drain a pint or two. Barbers and doctors alike keep their leeches well fed and their lancets sharp. You get to watch your life force drip into a bowl while the physician assures you that relief is imminent. Spoiler, it's not. At best, you feel woozy. At worst, you realize you've just paid someone to make you anemic. Bloodletting is the ultimate Victorian 2-for-1. A treatment and a handy excuse for a nap. Cupping is a more hands-on experience. Heated glass cups are placed on your skin, creating suction that leaves impressive purple welts. Proof of both treatment and your willingness to do literally anything for a cure. The idea is to draw out the bad humors and, perhaps, your last shred of patience. The staff love cupping because the marks linger, giving everyone visual evidence that something is being done. The patients, meanwhile, mostly try to hide their arms during visiting hours and hope the marks fade before their next family portrait. Blistering, though, might be the most baffling of all. Doctors apply caustic substances, mustard plasters, cantharides, that's Spanish fly, for extra historical irony, to your skin until it erupts in painful, angry blisters. The blisters, you're told, act as safety valves, releasing illness from deep within. If you protest, you're told that discomfort is a sign the treatment is taking effect. The real effect is that you become very, very motivated to look healthy at your next evaluation. And who could forget leeches? These squishy, businesslike worms are considered top-tier technology. Doctors apply them liberally to the temples, behind the ears, or anywhere else that seems a little too lively. Leeches are said to calm the spirits, though mostly they calm the doctor's nerves by giving him something to do. Leeches are the Victorian equivalent of multi-tools, always handy, slightly horrifying, and inexplicably popular. If one falls off and makes a break for it, it becomes the ward's unofficial mascot until Nurse Edwina catches it. And everyone pretends not to know where it went. For every experimental treatment, there is a logbook filled with optimistic notes. Patient spun vigorously, less talkative after. Bloodletting administered. Patient now resting. Cupping marks developing nicely. The doctors trade new methods, like children swapping marbles, eager to try the next great idea from Paris, Berlin, or that one cousin who attended a lecture in Edinburgh. As a patient, you learn quickly to accept whatever comes, spinning, bleeding, blistering, or leeching, and develop a healthy skepticism for any doctor who says, "I read about this in a fascinating pamphlet." Sometimes you wish they'd experiment with tea and sympathy instead. So, in the grand tradition of Victorian medicine, you brace yourself for whatever the next cutting-edge idea might be, knowing that when it comes to mental health, science and spectacle often spin together until nobody's sure which is which. Sometimes, the cure is spiritual. If you're hearing voices, it's probably the devil, or so you're told. You get prayer, scripture, and a sense of guilt that'll last longer than the laudanum. Let's take a pew, right next to the nurse with the heavy Bible and the talent for singing just a little off-key. Religion is everywhere in the Victorian asylum. Each ward has a chapel. Every corridor echoes with hymns. And even your breakfast is preceded by a brisk reading from the Psalms. If you weren't devout before you arrived, you'll soon learn the schedule by heart, if only for lack of anything else to do. The logic is simple. If the mind is troubled, perhaps the soul is, too. Your daily routine includes mandatory prayer sessions, scripture readings, and the occasional group recitation of the Lord's Prayer. The chaplain arrives in a cloud of incense and good intentions, gently asking whether you've been feeling especially tempted lately. If you confess to doubt, despair, or thinking too much about lunch, you're handed a small tract on the dangers of idleness and reminded that hard work and faith are the best medicines. For those with especially creative symptoms, visions, voices, mysterious premonitions, there's a whole extra layer of spiritual concern. The resident minister is summoned, often with a splash of holy water and a firm grip on the Book of Common Prayer. You're given spiritual counseling, which is sometimes indistinguishable from a polite exorcism. If you mention you've been speaking to angels, you're asked to write down exactly what they said, just in case it's something useful for Sunday's sermon. Religion here isn't all fire and brimstone. For many patients, chapel is a rare comfort, a place to sit quietly, listen to music, and remember the world outside. The stained glass windows cast rainbow patterns on the stone floor, and for a few minutes, you can forget about gruel, cold baths, and Nurse Edwina's scowl. The hymns, though a little flat, offer a kind of unity. Everyone sings, whether or not they know the words. Some simply hum along, grateful for a change of pace. But spiritual care is also another layer of surveillance. Your faith, or lack thereof, is noted in your record. Too pious? You're obsessive. Not pious enough? Clearly you need more prayer. Doubt is seen as a symptom, certainty as a potential trigger, and a well-timed confession can be the difference between another cold bath and an extra slice of bread at supper. Some staff members truly believe they are saving souls. The chaplain prays with you, tells stories of saints who overcame great suffering, and assures you that your troubles are part of a divine plan. You're encouraged to repent your sins, forgive your enemies, even if your enemy is the dining hall porridge, and meditate on your blessings. You begin to suspect that gratitude is a code word for accept your situation with good cheer. There are, of course, the skeptics. Some patients cross their fingers during prayer. Others recite the prayers backward just to see if anyone notices. In whispered tones after lights out, stories circulate about the nun who once slipped chocolates to the children's ward, or the minister who secretly enjoyed a good ghost story. Even the most devout find moments of irreverence. After all, there's only so many times you can hear Psalm 23 before you start reciting it in your sleep. Yet, in the end, the spiritual side of asylum life is just as much about control as comfort. Religion is both carrot and stick, a promise of salvation, and a reminder that all suffering has meaning, even if that meaning is survive another hymn. So you kneel, you pray, you hum along, and you wonder whether the angels would mind sharing a few practical tips on escaping through the chapel window. In the Victorian asylum, the soul is as much in need of supervision as the mind, and so you pray for peace, a quiet mind, and maybe, just maybe, a break from the sermons. Amen to that. By the late 1800s, the world starts to realize locking everyone up isn't the answer. Reformers visit, take notes, and sometimes even let a patient go home. Progress. Slower than the laundry cycle. Let's paint the scene. It's the end of the Victorian century. Outside the asylum, railways rattle, telegraphs buzz, and the empire is busy inventing new ways to both impress and confuse the world. Inside, however, things are still a little stuck. Literally, if your door's been jammed since 1862. But the wind is changing. Newspapers begin to run exposés. Novelists write tragic tales. And a new class of well-meaning reformers appears on the horizon, brandishing divine, clipboards, and a sense of righteous urgency. The first thing you notice about these reformers is that they arrive in pairs. A stern man in a top hat and a determined woman with a notebook. They are here to observe and report. They interview the staff, peek into wards, and sometimes even talk to the patients, usually with the same wide-eyed fascination most people reserve for the platypus exhibit at the zoo. They frown at the sight of chained beds, wince at the gruel, and make cryptic notes like insufficient sunshine and should consider curtains. The reformers' goal is simple: to transform the asylum from a warehouse for the unwanted into an institution of healing. In theory, this means less punishment, more compassion, and, eventually, shorter stays. In practice, it means an increase in paperwork, the sudden arrival of indoor plants, and the abolition of the spinning chair, much to the disappointment of the nurse who'd finally perfected her twirl. Pétitions circulate, speech, are given, and committees are formed, because if there's anything Victorians love more than strict routines, it's a really good committee. Reports flood Parliament, with stirring titles like On the Treatment of the Morally Disturbed Poor and Thoughts Concerning Bread Freshness. The press runs stories of brave patients released into the world, successfully taking up trades like hat-making, gardening, or just becoming local eccentrics with their own weather vanes. Small but real changes begin. Doctors are encouraged to spend more time listening and less time prescribing dubious tinctures. Chains and restraints become less common, replaced by a focus on kind words and structured activities. Someone suggests more gardens, more books, and, radically, less cabbage. There are new rules for hygiene, nutrition, and even a suggestion that the windows should actually open. Naturally, the suggestion is forwarded to the window committee. Most excitingly, a few patients are actually released. This is done with great ceremony, a certificate, and usually a group of staff waving from the front steps. The freed patient is wished well, often with the hope that they won't be back for the next full moon. Many succeed, some struggle, but all are proof that the world outside can be just as strange as life inside. Still, progress comes at a glacial pace. For every new reform, there's a chorus of, "But we've always done it this way." Some doctors are enthusiastic about the changes. Others keep their old jars of leeches just in case the future doesn't work out. The staff learn to smile through the inspections. The patients learn to rehearse their most improved expressions. And everyone hopes for more comfort and fewer lectures. Some reforms miss the mark. A piano in the day room, for example, quickly becomes the world's least harmonious experiment. But there are victories. Fewer ice baths, fewer hours spent staring at brick walls, and a cautious optimism that things might, someday, actually get better. So as the 19th century draws to a close, you find yourself caught between the old world and the new, between the cold certainty of the locked door and the faint promise of something gentler. The laundry cycle may still be slow, but at least, for the first time, there's hope of getting out before your socks turn to dust. Progress in the Victorian asylum is slow, but every small step is a revolution, and that, for once, is genuinely worth celebrating. Artists, poets, and everyday people, many vanish behind these walls. Some create masterpieces from misery. Others just disappear, lost to time and paperwork. Take a deep breath and imagine yourself in a corridor lined with old doors, each with a small brass number and a world of unspoken stories behind it. Victorian asylums didn't just house the forgotten. They inadvertently became the holding pens for some of history's most brilliant and misunderstood minds. Every barred window could have looked out on the next great novel or symphony, if only someone had thought to listen. Some of the most celebrated creatives of the 19th century found themselves on the wrong side of an asylum gate. John Clare, the peasant poet, scribbled verses in cramped script long after he'd been officially labelled mad. His notebooks overflowed with wild hedgerows, broken fences and birdsong, all dreamed up in a cell with a view of nothing but brick and sky. Sometimes his keepers let him wander the grounds, muttering lines about lost fields and England's vanishing countryside. He wasn't alone. Many patients denied their audiences, performed for the shadows, the sparrows, and, occasionally, a sympathetic nurse with a smuggled pencil. Women artists and writers, in particular, were vulnerable to the catch-all diagnosis of hysteria. One misplaced diary, one too many late-night scribbling sessions, and suddenly you're an unstable genius, in need of seclusion and strict rest. Their works were tucked away in bedside tables, or, more likely, swept up and thrown away by well-meaning relatives, worried about improper subjects. A story never told, a painting never finished, a melody hummed softly to the moon when no one was listening. Of course, not every victim was a genius by profession. Some were simply people who thought too deeply, laughed too loudly, or grieved too long. A tailor with a talent for whistling might find himself locked away for melancholy airs. A young mother who lost a child could end up committed for prolonged weeping. And the further you were from wealth or social standing, the easier it was for your silence to become permanent. Occasionally, a survivor's work would slip past the walls and into the world. A poem published in a tiny journal, unsigned. A painting auctioned years later, the artist's name lost to the mouldy archives. Sometimes, visitors marveled at the strange beauty of patient-made art on asylum walls, collages of thread, and 4.2 scrap paper haunting sketches in the margins of official documents. The creativity was everywhere, if only someone cared to see it. For the most part, however, the records were less poetic. Patient number 302, inclined to melancholy, spends hours gazing out the window. Subject displays agitation when denied ink and paper. Has composed 3 symphonies, all in C minor. History doesn't remember these names, but the buildings themselves hold their echoes. A certain hush in the library, a faded scrap of verse tucked behind a radiator. Everyday life for these lost geniuses meant trading inspiration for survival, artistry for compliance. The tools of the trade became whatever was at hand: gruel bowls as drums, bits of charcoal as pencils, bed sheets as stage curtains for the imagination's private theatrics. The greatest works of the era may have been created in secret, performed only for a patch of afternoon sunlight and a few curious mice. Today, the names of the famous victims sometimes surface in academic studies or museum plaques. But most of the stories remain in the shadows, silent reminders that madness and genius have always been awkward neighbors. For every masterpiece that reached the outside world, 100 more faded quietly behind locked doors, their creators known only by initials and case numbers. So as you drift off, remember that history's most remarkable voices sometimes came from its quietest rooms. The next time you hear a poem or a song that feels like it's speaking to your soul, spare a thought for the ones who dreamed up beauty in the unlikeliest of places, and whose stories, if not their names, still hum through the cracks in the asylum walls. If you get out, you're changed forever. You've survived the cure, the system, and the lingering suspicion that maybe you weren't the crazy one after all. Welcome back to the outside, now featuring at least 3 fewer leeches. Let's set the scene. The day your release finally arrives, it's less a celebration and more a carefully managed transaction. There are forms to sign, lectures to endure, and at least one doctor who looks vaguely disappointed that you're taking your interesting case out into the world. The staff bid you farewell with a mixture of relief, pride, and the unspoken hope that you won't turn up on their doorstep next full moon. You step outside, blinking in the sunlight, feeling the world rush at you in color and sound. After so long in the regimented monotony of asylum life, everything seems too bright, too loud, and far too spontaneous. The simple act of crossing a busy street or buying a loaf of bread becomes a small odyssey, one with fewer orderlies, and, thankfully, no suspicious gruel. The birds sound wilder, the air smells faintly of freedom, and possibly manure, but freedom nonetheless. And every cobblestone seems to say, "Welcome back. Good luck. Rejoining society isn't easy." Friends and family treat you with the careful politeness reserved for glass ornaments and overly large houseplants. Neighbors avoid direct questions, but can't resist a little side-eye at the market. Your mail piles up with well-meaning notes. "Thinking of you. So glad you're better. Can I have your old hat?" Meanwhile, your own thoughts flicker between gratitude and the uneasy suspicion that perhaps the world outside is just another flavor of madness, only with better window views. Practicalities must be handled. If you're lucky, you have a home to return to and someone who kept the dust at bay. If not, you face the Victorian safety net. Distant relatives, boarding houses, or, if you're especially plucky, a spirited attempt at becoming a poet or fortune teller. Work is another matter. References from asylums aren't exactly the career boosters they claim to be. Excellent at folding towels under supervision only gets you so far. Some former patients become invisible, blending into the background, while others reinvent themselves as eccentric aunts, mysterious lodgers, or local sages who know exactly which mushrooms not to eat. Emotionally, the scars linger. You flinch at sudden bells, hesitate when a doctor's coat enters your peripheral vision, and have vivid, recurring dreams about cold baths and starchy blankets. Your sense of humor becomes razor sharp, sometimes the only tool left for carving out a new place in the world. At family gatherings, you drop references to my time inside and watch relatives scatter like startled pigeons. And then there's the delicious irony of it all. You've survived the system designed to cure you, only to find that modern life is hardly a bastion of sanity. The city is noisier, the gossip fiercer, and every few months a new scandal breaks about the latest humane treatment on the horizon. Newspapers tout revolutionary cures, from dietary supplements to electro-gadgets that promise peace of mind, with slightly fewer side effects than arsenic. You become, in a way, a walking contradiction, part cautionary tale, part pioneer. Others seek your advice. How does one navigate the world with a history? What's the secret to avoiding another stay? Your answer, delivered with a wry smile, is always the same. Don't get caught reading poetry at breakfast, and steer clear of cabbage. Yet, for all the absurdities, you find moments of genuine recovery. A hot cup of tea, an open window, the gentle pleasure of choosing your own bedtime. You realize that getting better isn't about erasing the past. It's about growing stranger and kinder, with a pocket full of stories and the wisdom to laugh when you need it most. So, you step back into the world, changed but unbroken, forever grateful for the smallest comforts, freedom, sunlight, and the blessed, leech-free embrace of modern irony. Your wardrobe in the asylum is thoughtfully designed to maximize both discomfort and humiliation. Starched collars, itchy wool, and gowns that somehow never fit. The fashion statement here is less healing elegance and more Cabbage Patch ghost. Accessorize with a mysterious stain. Let's step into your new closet, a generous term for the single hook on the back of your door. The first thing you notice is the color palette: healthful drab, institutional grey. And what was this before the wash? If you're feeling fancy, you can trade the beige for a brown, or the grey for an off-white that's mostly just laundered so many times it gave up. Every outfit is designed for maximum uniformity and minimum individuality. The only real way to stand out is by acquiring a truly impressive patch or a rip of mysterious origin. Dressing is an ordeal, and not just because the fabric could strip paint. The gowns, issued fresh every Monday, if the laundry is working, are one size fits most, and in practice, fit almost nobody. Too tight in the shoulders, too loose at the waist, and always just short enough to guarantee cold ankles. The collars scratch at your neck, like a persistent moral lesson, while the sleeves do their best to collect every stray drop of gruel, tea, or medicinal syrup. A personal favorite feature is the buttons. Sometimes mismatched, sometimes missing, always an adventure. If you are hoping for personal flair, forget it. Belts, jewelry, ribbons, and lace are considered disruptive to the healing process. Pockets are strictly forbidden, ostensibly to prevent you from hoarding contraband or emotional baggage. Even hair accessories are suspect. Should you arrive with a hat, it's whisked away and, if you're lucky, replaced by a serviceable cap that makes every head look like a disappointed turnip. Men's attire is no better. Trousers of indeterminate age, a shirt with a collar so stiff it could slice cheese, and, on special occasions, a vest that may once have belonged to a scarecrow. Socks are a game of chance. Will they match? Will they fit? Will they contain more than one hole? The answer, inevitably, is maybe. And then there's the footwear. Institutional slippers are legendary for their ability to absorb water while repelling comfort. If you manage to keep both on your feet while walking across the drafty corridor, you're doing better than most. Every shuffle and squeak reminds you that luxury is a concept best enjoyed outside these walls. Laundry day is its own event. All clothing is washed in the hottest water imaginable, by hand, by someone who has never once heard of fabric softener. The result, garments that return stiff, slightly smaller, and somehow even itchier. Your monogram, carefully stitched in by a hopeful relative, is now just a ghostly outline beneath a patch that reads Ward 3. Sharing is common. Discovering you're wearing someone else's shirt is just part of the morning routine. Despite the bleakness, there are attempts at rebellion. Some patients attempt asylum chic, rolling sleeves, tying sashes from sheets, or fashioning brooches from leftover buttons and safety pins. These innovations are swiftly noticed and, more often than not, confiscated. The message is clear. Healing must never be stylish. Special events, like visiting day, warrant a fresh gown, meaning it's only half as wrinkled and possibly missing the stain shaped like the queen. Patient swap tips. Soak your cuffs in hot water overnight, or at least wave them near the stove for luck. Fashion is communal. Compliments are rare but cherished. That's a particularly striking shade of grey, Doris. So as you tie your lopsided gown and peer at your reflection in the wobbly mirror, remember, you are the very picture of Victorian institutional fashion. You may not be comfortable, you may not be stylish, but you are, unmistakably, part of the tribe, united by wool, starch, and the eternal question, what exactly is that stain? Every minute of your life is regulated by bells and board attendants. Wake up at sunrise, cold bath, line up for roll call, walk in a circle, repeat. Even the clocks seem tired. There's a schedule for everything, except sanity. Let's step into your average day. The first thing you notice is the bell. Not a cheerful tinkle, but a deep, mournful clang that shivers through the stone walls and echoes straight into your dreams. 5 seconds later, a nurse with the energy of a Monday morning coughs outside your door and reminds you, gently but firmly, that the day waits for no one, which is a nice way of saying, get up, or we'll get you up. Your bed, never quite as soft as you remember, has imprinted its lumpy personality onto your back. You scramble into your regulation gown, see previous segment for fashion trauma, and, if you're lucky, manage to beat the line for the one half-functional wash basin, a splash of cold water to the face, or, on particularly cruel days, a full cold bath wakes you up with all the subtlety of an Arctic expedition. Breakfast is served in the communal dining hall at exactly 7 a.m. A bell rings, you shuffle in. Seating is dictated by ward, seniority, or sometimes pure chaos. Gruel, as always, is the centerpiece. You eat in silence, the only sound the scraping of spoons and the occasional cough that echoes like a cannon blast. An attendant glides up and down the tables, making sure no one is hoarding bread or sneaking sugar cubes. Conversation is discouraged unless it's about gratitude. After breakfast, it's time for roll call. Line up, hands at your sides, faces washed, collars straight, or as straight as institutional starch will allow. The matron, clutching her beloved ledger, ticks off names. If you sneeze or fidget, you get a look that promises extra chores later. After roll call comes therapeutic activity, which could mean anything from sweeping floors and folding towels to a silent walk around the garden. The phrase therapeutic is used generously. Mid-morning means supervised exercise, a brisk constitutional, 2 laps around the gravel path, and don't stop to smell the roses. The packed nurses march in time, clipboards at the ready, counting steps and monitoring morale. If the weather is dreadful, you'll do laps indoors, circling the hall until you begin to suspect you're wearing grooves into the flagstones. Lunch arrives at noon, heralded by another bell. The meal, more gruel, perhaps a hint of turnip, and a side of bread. Attendants ensure every bite is eaten. If you're slow, you're encouraged to hurry up. If you're too fast, you get a lecture about savoring your blessings. The post-lunch hour is quiet time, during which everyone is expected to rest, read a Bible passage, or stare wistfully at the wall. Heaven forbid you nap. You might miss afternoon chores. The afternoon brings a flurry of activity. Laundry, more chores. Or, if you're lucky, a visit from the doctor. The doctor's rounds are part performance, part medical checkup, and part lottery. Will he prescribe you an extra walk, or just a pat on the back and a reminder to cheer up? Tea is served at 4, though tea is an optimistic term for weak liquid, and a biscuit with the texture of a small paving stone. After tea, you may have another walk, group hymn singing, or a rousing reading of improving literature. Dusk signals the final bell, time to return to your rooms, change into a slightly stiffer nightgown, and prepare for the evening inspection. By the time the final bell clangs, you're ready for sleep, or at least for 8 hours of staring at the ceiling and wondering what tomorrow's schedule has in store. In the Victorian asylum, life is ruled by routines and regulations. Regret is optional, but highly recommended. So you close your eyes, awaiting another day of bells, rules, and the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, they'll forget to ring the bell tomorrow. But don't count on it. On visiting day, your relatives arrive smelling like the outside world and carrying cakes with slightly accusatory notes. They speak in hushed tones, avoiding eye contact. Then, leave just as quickly, relieved that your new home has locks on both sides. Visiting day is an event, marked by extra sweeping in the corridors, a dash of lavender water in the air, and a sudden spike in anxiety levels across the wards. The staff are all smiles. The gruel is a touch less grey, and even the matron has polished her shoes. You hear the creak of the main doors and sense the swirl of new scents, coal smoke, cologne, the faint trace of rain on a wool coat, reminders that there's still a world beyond the walls. Your family arrives in a cluster of nervous energy. There's your mother, clinging to a tin of fruitcake like it's a peace offering or perhaps a bribe. Your father inspects the window bars with a frown of approval. Siblings hover nearby, trying to appear invisible. If you're lucky, someone brings a bouquet from the garden, snipped hastily, half wilted, but still the brightest thing in the room. The visit itself is choreographed down to the last syllable. A table in the parlor, really just a room with too many chairs and not enough cushions, serves as neutral ground. Tea is poured, usually weak, sometimes cold, and always accompanied by a selection of biscuits chosen for their ability to withstand months in a tin. Conversation drifts between the weather, distant relatives, and the garden's progress. Everyone does their best to pretend that you're just away at school, or perhaps taking the world's longest convalescence. But the questions soon come. Light as feathers, but twice as pointed. Are you feeling better? Are they treating you well? Do you remember to pray? All asked with a smile that trembles ever so slightly. If you answer too cheerfully, someone wonders aloud if you're putting on a brave face. If you confess to loneliness or sadness, eyebrows knit and notebooks come out. Another item for the concerned observations column back at home. There's blame in the air, subtle and sticky. An aunt whispers about delicate nerves running in the family. Your cousin's wife avoids your eyes, adjusting her gloves, and suddenly remembering urgent business in town. Someone mentions that perhaps, if you just tried harder, things would be different. It's never quite said outright, but it floats between the teacups, heavy as fog. Meanwhile, you're handed small gifts, cakes, a handkerchief, a new Bible, each one wrapped in hope and just a hint of apology. You thank everyone, unwrap everything, and wonder what's more tiring, life inside the asylum, or the exhausting effort to reassure those on the outside. You ask about news from home, but the answers are careful, edited for content, and always end with, "But enough about us. How are you?" As the visit nears its end, the conversation fades. Your father checks his watch. Your mother dabs her eyes. And your siblings drift toward the door like birds sensing a storm. There's a final flurry of awkward hugs, a promise to visit soon, and then, suddenly, you're alone. Again, surrounded by the lingering scent of cologne and the echo of goodbyes. The staff sweep in to clear away the remains of the visit. The matron offers a sympathetic nod, or at least something close to it. The nurses bring you back to your ward, where the familiar routine is oddly comforting. Outside, your family steps into the rain, jackets drawn tight, already composing letters about your improvement for next week's post. You sit on your bed, dividing the fruitcake into careful slices, savoring the rare taste of the outside world. Visiting day is over, and so is the exhausting performance of being both the patient and the prodigal child. You exhale and wait for the bell to signal that life, with all its routines and regrets, goes on. Every so often, someone tries to make a run for it, usually by blending in with the laundry or impersonating the world's least convincing doctor. The staff has seen it all. The only thing harder than escaping is convincing anyone you were ever gone. The urge to escape usually hits around week 3. That's when the gruel starts to feel personal. The cold baths begin to haunt your dreams, and you start eyeing the garden gate like it owes you money. You wouldn't be the first. History is littered with the hopeful, the determined, and the deeply delusional, all plotting their grand return to the outside world armed with nothing but a mop and an overinflated sense of stealth. One popular strategy? Laundry-based infiltration. The logic goes something like this. If clean sheets get taken outside, perhaps you can be mistaken for one. So you curl up in a hamper, disguise yourself with a pillowcase, and wait. Unfortunately, the laundry is always handled by Nurse Marjorie, who hasn't been fooled since the incident of the escaping boot in 43. She pokes every bundle with a broom handle and, if suspicious, throws in a bar of lye soap to test for yelps. Your plan ends with you being wheeled back to your room, dripping and smelling faintly of lemon starch. Then there's the classic, "I'm totally a doctor" routine. This one requires confidence, a borrowed coat, and the ability to walk quickly while looking slightly annoyed. The trouble is, the real doctors all have mutton chops, spectacles, and a permanent air of superiority that's hard to fake. If you can't pronounce melancholia with just the right amount of disdain, someone's going to spot the ruse. Bonus points if you get caught mid-lecture on the therapeutic benefits of beet juice. A more subtle method is blending into the garden. During supervised walks, you linger near a hedge. Wait for a distraction, perhaps someone loudly reciting Psalm 23 backwards, and then attempt a quiet crouch and dash. It's foolproof, except for the part where the hedge leads directly to another wall, and your squeaky shoes betray you before you reach anything remotely resembling freedom. Escape attempts are often foiled not by guards or walls, but by the sheer absurdity of the institution itself. You reach the gate and it's locked with a latch that only opens from the inside. Using a lever known only to the matron and her favorite cat, you try the back entrance, only to find it guarded by an elderly gardener who doesn't mind talking for hours but won't let you pass unless you correctly identify 3 species of cabbage. Then there's the paperwork. Even if you do manage to get out and blend into society, the asylum has a filing system so labyrinthine that your escape becomes a clerical mystery. You aren't marked escaped, you're marked temporarily unlocated, in field therapy, or most insultingly, possibly visiting relatives. Try explaining that at the next village fair when someone recognizes you from the asylum's annual open house. And if you do get caught, you're not punished, just gently returned with a fresh gown, a bit of toast, and a patronizing, "We all have our days." The staff have seen it all before. One man once made it as far as the town fountain dressed as a nun. Another tried to blend in with the local sheep. A woman once held a tea party for the gatekeeper and nearly walked out during the 3rd cup. You learn that escaping isn't always about distance. Sometimes it's about carving out a tiny space of freedom inside, finding humor, sharing secrets with the night sky, or quietly pretending that your bedpan is a travel hatbox from Paris. Because when the walls are too high and the doors too locked, the best escape might just be imagination. And that, thankfully, still fits in your head. So tonight, as you lay back in your own bed, let's take a final, grateful breath together. Because you've just survived a night in the Victorian asylum, and against all odds, you're still in one piece. You've braved the cold baths, the straitjackets, the enthusiastic but confused doctors, and enough gruel to last you until the next century. You've witnessed the era when mental illness was both a mystery and a convenient excuse for your relatives to finally have some peace and quiet. You've learned that sometimes the only thing scarier than madness is the cure. But you've also met the resilience of people who, despite everything, found ways to survive, to adapt, and sometimes even to laugh in the bleakest circumstances. People who held on through locked doors, endless routines, and treatments that sounded suspiciously like punishments. They remind us that even in the worst times, humans are tough, stubborn, and, let's face it, a little ridiculous. So tonight, as you tuck in under soft, clean sheets and let the gentle white noise carry you away, maybe whisper a quiet thank you to the generations who came before, the ones who navigated leeches, laudanum, cold porridge, and the occasional stray squirrel in the hallway, so you could have warm water, indoor plumbing, and a healthcare system that mostly keeps the electricity away from your skull. Because history is a mess, and people are strange, but that's what makes surviving and sleeping so worthwhile. Drift off gently, knowing you're safe, you're sane, and there are no visiting hours in your bedroom. Sleep well, and I'll see you in the next adventure through the weird, wild, and wonderfully uncomfortable past. Good night.